Chapter 9. Shackles. On leaving school, thanks to one of his father's senior partners, Nobuo obtained a job as a secretary in the law courts. One rainy day, about a month after he started work, Nobuo went out of his room carrying some papers. As he turned into the corridor, he bumped into a young man being escorted by one of the court policemen. Up till now, when he met a prisoner in the corridors, he would always avert his eyes and step out of the way. Feeling strangely disturbed as they passed each other, he would wonder whether the man had a mother and father, or wife and children, and what had happened to bring him to this place. But today, when he turned into the corridor and bumped into the man, he had no time to avoid him. The prisoner was wearing a deep hat of woven reeds, but he lifted his head and looked reproachfully at Nobuo. Seeing his face, Nobuo nearly cried out, for it was Torao, the boy with whom he had played as a child. "Little Torao!" Nobuo swallowed the exclamation he was about to utter and looked blankly after Torao, who lowered his head and tried to avoid being recognized. Maybe I was mistaken, Nobuo thought. Those round eyes, like two little black beans, surely they were Torao's. He remembered affectionately the argument they had had on the roof of the shed, and how Torao always came with Roku the hawker. Torao was a quiet, good-natured boy. What had happened to him afterwards that he should now have his hands tied behind his back? Nobuo was unsettled all day. Before leaving work, he scanned the bulletin board outside the courtroom and found that it was Torao for certain. He had been accused of theft and assault. Even when he got home and started his evening meal, he still felt unsettled. He did not notice the sound of the rain dripping from the eaves. "What's the matter, Nobuo?" Machiko looked at him in surprise. "Huh, what's that? What's wrong with you? You've just been breaking up the bean curd with your chopsticks." Punctilious Nobuo would never break up the cubes of bean curd. He ate them as they were. But when she spoke and he looked at his plate, there was the bean curd all in bits. "Well, I never. So he has. Nobuo, that's not like you at all." Kiku had noticed something strange about Nobuo even before Machiko, but this was the first mention she had made of it. "Are you feeling ill?" she asked, hiding her anxiety. She was more concerned that something had happened at his work than for his health. "Not really, but today's rainy, and I'm a bit cold." Nobuo was uncertain whether to tell them about Torao or not. Although he was only a childhood friend, Torao had shown that he did not want to be recognized, and therefore Nobuo decided to keep silent about the incident if he could. But he also thought he ought to reveal something to Kiku and Machiko, as they were anxious about him. Since his father's death, Nobuo had been filled with an overflowing love and concern to share everything, both joys and sorrows, with his mother and sister. He seemed to have awakened to his position as mainstay of the family. Now he had lost his father, Nobuo was zealous in his care for them, and in doing so he became an adult. After they had finished the meal, Nobuo spoke. "Mother, do you remember Roku the hawker?" "Roku? Who was he, I wonder?" Kiku's face showed that she did not know anything about him. "Well, wasn't there a hawker who sold combs and thread and cuff protectors and things?" "A hawker? Yes, he used to bring a little boy called Torao along with him. He once pushed me off the outhouse roof." When he said this, Kiku remembered. "Of course, that was when your grandmother was still alive. Your father told me about it." Kiku nodded. She was not going to be drawn too far. "Ah, Torao, that nice dark-eyed boy." Machiko clapped her hands as she remembered him. "I remember playing hide-and-seek with him. But did Roku ever come to the house?" Then Nobuo remembered that after his grandmother's death, Roku had stopped coming for some reason or other. 2 years later, it had been just Torao who had come unexpectedly to play and then disappeared again. "What happened to Roku, I wonder?" Kiku brought the conversation back to the main subject. "I don't know, but today, in the corridor at the office, I ran slap-bang into Torao, my friend when I was a little boy." "Fancy that. Where does he live now? He must be grown up by now," said Machiko. "It's not like that. He had his hands behind his back." Nobuo showed them, with both wrists together. Kiku and Machiko both raised their voices. "Well, what happened?" Kiku frowned. "He's being tried for robbery and assault. It shocked me that such a good-natured fellow would do such a thing. Just to think of it is depressing." At Nobuo's words, Kiku and Machiko nodded. Now that you mention it, I've seen Torao recently, at Asakusa. There was a man, drunk since noon, with some woman hanging on to him. It was about a fortnight ago. At the time I thought I'd seen his face before, and after I had gone a little way I realized he looked like Torao. Machiko was thoughtful. That's impossible. Nobuo could not even imagine what Torao would look like, drunk. But at the time I only thought it looked like him. I couldn't really think that it was Torao. And Machiko looked as though she remembered something else that happened at the time. Even if people are good as children, can they really turn out like this? Nobuo asked his mother, who had been listening intently to their conversation. Nobuo, there are times when people change more than they ever imagined they could. Kiku spoke quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Nobuo had a thought that made him blush. I could turn into the kind of person I'd never imagined myself being. Up to the day he had gone to the Yoshiwara, he had never imagined himself as doing such a thing. It was certainly not what he would have done on his own. Until now, Nobuo had thought of his true self as the one which had run away. But this was the first time the ugly truth had come home to him, that when he had hurried towards the gate of the Yoshiwara, it had also been his true self. Then there were the times when he was beset by mental images of a woman's body and could not sleep. This was a side of himself he would have been ashamed to admit to anyone. So now he was thinking, surely at these times too, it's your true self, Nobuo Nagano. If the seemingly mild Torao were the real Torao also went about assaulting people and doing things like that. Come to think of it, however much one might say that Torao had just been a child, the fact that he had pushed him off the roof showed that even then he had been capable of doing such things in a fit of temper. Nobuo changed his mind about Torao. People are frightening things. There are situations and times when I'm very kind, but at other times I'm so ill-natured I hate myself. Machiko gave a little shrug. Her shoulders had recently taken on a very feminine outline. Mother's just the same, you know. Kiku smiled. What, mother? Nobuo had come to think of his mother as always kind and peaceful. Where in his mother's life could there be that kind of contradiction? He thought, looking at his mother's face. Don't look so surprised, Nobuo. Your mother's human too. I easily get depressed and hate people and get angry. That's impossible, it can't be true. I can't imagine you ever hating anyone or getting angry, Nobuo broke in. Nobuo, just because you can't see a person is angry, it doesn't mean they are not. If you think your mother is never angry, you're greatly mistaken. She had only to remember the time when she was forced to leave Nobuo and get out of the house. Her attitude then towards Tos, who had driven her out, was hardly excusable. Pray for those who persecute you. Kiku's conscience always pained her when she heard these words in church. After he went to bed, Nobuo thought about what his mother had said. Just because you can't see a person is angry, it doesn't mean that they are not. And there are times when people change more than they ever imagined they could. He could not say with certainty that in the decades that lay ahead, he would not, like Torao, commit some crime. Whatever the circumstances, he did not think he would become a thief. But if he was living in a boarding house, and there happened to be a young girl there, and he was alone with her some time, he could not deny that desire might turn him into a maddened wolf. Even if she happened to be someone's wife, Nobuo was still afraid that something would happen. Whether he laid hands on somebody's wife or an unmarried girl, it would still be a crime. But even if it did not involve breaking the law, it would still not be right. It's not only breaking the law that is wrong. Nobuo shuddered at the thought. In their respectable district, the evenings were short. There were no sounds, as if everyone was already asleep. Somewhere far away, a dog was howling. Its voice increased his feeling of loneliness. He thought about one of his superiors at the office, a most evil-natured man who would give his juniors vague instructions to bring him certain sets of papers and scold them severely because they brought the wrong ones. Nobuo had come to the conclusion that he did this deliberately in order to have the opportunity of telling people off. This man was committing no crime, but the effects of his unpleasantness were far more serious than the crime of stealing a few apples. As he wrestled with all this, Nobuo had to make a new assessment of himself. Making people unhappy, That's a serious sin, too. This word sin, the more he thought about it, the more points cropped up which he could not define. Perhaps the best I can do is to keep from harming anyone else. Then another thought struck him. Someone like me, always plagued with thinking about women, people don't know what I'm thinking, but that can't be wrong too, can it? When he tried looking at it in this way, surprisingly it seemed to come closer to being sin than hitting someone in a fight. It was nothing that anyone could see. It threatened no one. But Nobuo was amazed by the strong sense he now had that harboring such thoughts was sin. Can it be that sin is developing right in the depth of my heart, where no one knows about it? Nobuo was still thinking about this when he fell asleep.